doing today?
Great.
Like, I don't know what you guys have been doing in the other rooms or the other MCs have been doing, but we have energy here downstairs in this room. So, Boston, how's everybody doing?
All right.
There we go. My name is Jacob. I'm the host for today. Super excited about everything that's been going on. It's been really awesome. This whole Startup Boston week, we just really wanted to bring the whole startup community together, and then also give whoever it is, whether you're a super early stage founder to somebody that's trying to build a team, we just wanted to give you guys the resources and just be a space for us to kind of collaborate and grow together. So this panel is going to be awesome, I know. But before we wanted to dive in, I wanted to, again, thank Suffolk University for offering their space to us. We couldn't do any of this without our gracious donors, and especially Suffolk. And so they have a booth, I believe it's on the second floor. So if anyone's interested in any of the grad programs, they have some great stuff. And then also, if you're not necessarily looking to be a student, there's always students that need help at this university. So if you're looking to get involved, make sure you give them you check them out and see how you can get plugged in. So without any further ado, I'm gonna hand it off and we'll get started here.
We're going to bring the microphone way down. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I know it's a little bit later in the afternoon, so feel free to get up, take a shot of espresso, whatever you need to do to keep going. My name is Deborah Kurtz. I'm the founder, and I recruit for my own boutique recruiting firm called Magenta Search. And the reason that I'm here today hosting this panel is I work with a lot of founders, I work with a lot of young companies, and I am on the front lines of oftentimes making the first sales hire in the organization outside of the founders. As I know that we can all appreciate, it's a critical hire, it's an enormous hire, and there's a lot of emotion that goes into making that move with companies, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm just wondering if we can get a little bit of information about who we have in the audience today. Do you mind just raising your hand? Who would identify here as a founder? Okay, great. Investors? Nobody has any money. Oh, you have some money. Okay, that's the guy that you guys want to go to. Any marketers? Okay, great. And how about salespeople? You're all liars. Every single one of you is a salesperson. Okay, so get that on straight. So thanks so much. I'm going to make this just super basic by saying we all know that if our companies and startups are going to continue to exist, we need money. And today we're going to focus on the uncomfortable subject of scaling and growth, which is passing the sales baton, scaling revenue without losing control. Let's turn over to our panel today. We have a great group because there's a lot of diversity here in terms of experiences with this particular subject matter. Let me hand it over. We have Hannah, Chris, Jennifer, and Liz. And I'm going to keep this exciting by saying we're going to start in the middle with Jennifer. Would you mind giving us an intro?
That seems like such a setup, but
It's
okay.
such a setup.
So I think can you hear me? Everybody hear me? So the question of why I am here, I am here because I own a branding agency that specializes in helping sales forces grow and tell their story. So by way of background, the part that's probably not as relevant for here is oftentimes my firm gets brought in to help organizations arm their sales force with selling stories that are around new product offerings or in new markets or things like that. We also often get brought in when a founder has decided they need to expand their sales force and they have to get what's in their head out into a sales story that other people can tell. So that's I'm sort of coming at this conversation through the lens of messaging and marketing.
Amazing. Hannah, do you mind giving an intro?
Oh, we're keeping it interesting.
Oh, yeah, on your toes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Leary. I handle strategic accounts at OneScreen.ai, which is an ad tech startup based here in Boston. I am here on this panel because I have been passed the baton. So I was our founding account executive, hired almost 2 years ago, and have moved into a strategic account management role. So kind of offering a different perspective than some of the others on the panel, but really excited for the conversation.
Thank you so much. Liz, you want to go?
Sure. Liz Graham. I've been a part of 5 now startups in the Boston tech ecosystem, really specialize in the build and scale phase, been also an advisor to many startups, some of whom I've cautioned against passing the sales baton, so we can talk a little bit about that as well, but been part of that transition from founder sales to bringing your kind of expert sales folks in.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Okay, and I'm Chris Elland. I've been in the tech industry around here for a long time. I am, if I had to put all the things I do, they wouldn't all fit on that slide. I do run marketing at Acumina. Acumina is a employee experience software company up in Nashua. I'm their fractional head of marketing, so that's one of the things I do. I also teach at Northeastern, the competition I know, which is actually where I just came from. I'm in the entrepreneurship and innovation group over there, and I'm a venture mentor for their venture mentor network. And I also do a little bit of investing. I'm a member of TBD Angels, which is a local angel group. So I have been a CEO 3 times. I have run sales, I've run marketing, which I'm doing currently. I've run alliances, and definitely have some war stories, some wins, some bump my head a few times as well, or the company hiring the wrong person or doing it at the wrong time. So I think why I'm here is to share a lot of those experiences, and I'm looking forward to doing that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of our session. If you have a burning question, hang on to it. We will try to get to it. Thank you for those intros. And all questions are open to anybody here, so all of you, please feel free to chime in if you feel like this is, the questions are up your alley. Starting with, we have our company, we're selling a little bit, maybe we're selling a lot. When is the time, what are the indicators that a founder needs to go out and pass that baton and bring somebody in or promote somebody from within to carry the bag off their shoulders and onto somebody else's? What should founders be looking for as the right indicators that the timing is right? And the flip side is maybe what are the indicators that the timing is wrong?
Anybody want to go? I can start. I mean, I would say 2 things. I would say, first of all, if the founder really enjoys selling, they shouldn't necessarily feel pressure to get it off their shoulders. Of course, the founder, and assuming the founder is a CEO, is going to have a lot of other stuff to do. And that other stuff is important, like raising capital, which, by the way, is sales as well. But so they may kind of need, for reasons of not having enough time, to find somebody to come and run sales. But the net is, if a founder enjoys sales, I would say by all means keep doing it, because the best salesperson is usually going to be the founder. But I would say the other answer I would give is repeatability, which is where, because usually, not necessarily always, but in the early stages of a company, what you're selling, what you're doing is pretty nebulous. And that is really hard to bring somebody in, particularly somebody from the outside, and say, here, sell this, when what you're selling is still kind of not fully well defined, i.e. you don't have product market fit. So when you start to feel like you have some repeatability is also a good time. But again, back to what I said earlier, I don't think the founder should necessarily feel pressure to give it up unless other items that are more important are overwhelming and filling up their calendar and they feel they need to.
Yeah, if I can build on what Chris was saying, when I was at Notarize, we brought in a VP of sales, and I think what worked there, it ended up being a bit of a hybrid, where the founders kept more of the enterprise sales, which were kind of quite bespoke, and the company was about $1 million in ARR at that point in time, but we brought in a sales leader for more of the SMB and mid-market, had that repeatability. We had BDR and a sort of junior AE at that point, so it was able to sort of crank up that sales machine and save some of the founder bandwidth for more of the very large, very strategic relationships.
Chris, you mentioned if the product doesn't have product market fit or if the value proposition is nebulous, do you feel that it increases the risk of hiring somebody externally versus if the product market fit is clearly defined?
Yes, it increases the risk. There are some sales unicorns out there for sure who can take a unformed pre-product market fit offering sometimes and be successful. But oftentimes the best salespeople are good because they've kind of got a methodology. They know about repeatability and being able to do things over and over again. If the company's not at that stage and you hire the type of person, it's usually not going to work out.
And Jennifer, I'm just going to gear this towards you.
Yep.
In terms of defining the sales story at this stage when the founders are looking to bring in a new person or somebody to take ownership of that, can you just talk about what you've seen, what should be done from a sales story perspective to ensure success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting hearing what you're saying, Chris, because I think one of the things that I see a lot of times when we come into earlier stage companies is part of the reason the founder doesn't want to leave the sales process is because they want to be close to the customer. And they really want to understand if they're still trying to shape the story, they want to make sure that they understand what customers are responding to and what the sort of bylines or the messages or the proof points that need to be heard, and they're still trying to define that. So that process, I feel like, is one of the things that keeps founders from stepping away from the sales process. Where I've seen it be the most successful is when a founder has decided what the main thing is, and they've sort of decided this is sort of the value proposition for the business right now. It might change over time, but this is what we are going to go out and sell. And they're confident enough in that when they bring salespeople in, they can be more directive to the salespeople that are looking for repeatable process and storytelling and direction around which markets they're supposed to be, focusing on with what types of messages.
And Liz, I'm going to point this a little bit at you. You've shared your story about Notarize. What are the harbingers that you would say, and all of you can jump in, but what are the harbingers that you would say, now is when you need to go get somebody? Now this needs to happen. Sorry to put the spotlight on you. I'm just thinking of you saying when not to.
Yeah, absolutely. Having some good pipeline, more pipe than you have people to manage. Like, you don't want folks sitting and waiting for engagement. We were in an interesting space where if you can put yourself in the Wayback Machine pre-COVID and say, like, remote online notarization, who would want that? It's like, it was a really, really, really hard sell to the market before people didn't want to talk to people in person anymore. And so, trying to sift through and really qualify the leads, because there are a bunch of people I'd sort of throw the current AI environment to be very similar, who are sort of remote curious, and they wanted to talk to us to be informed. And so having a seasoned sales leader in who can really define what is a good qualified lead, how do you sift through a lot of inbound and say, like, this is what's worth putting resources against. It was a team of 3. It wasn't like this voluminous sales organization. So it wasn't, I would say it doesn't necessarily tip when it's like your sales team's a certain size. You have 8 salespeople, so now you need a VP of sales. I think it's really more organic than that. It's, a lot of what Chris was saying. You've got something that is repeatable, that, there is a profile of customer that you can either outbound to or inbound and quickly identify and say, this looks just like this other thing. And, you may be wandering a bit in the woods in terms of, like, what does your comp plan look like? Because sometimes it is a little bit of a, try it out. So I'm also a big fan of, at least in the early days, putting a bit of a floor on sales comp to say, like, hey, you won't earn less than X, but we think we have this plan figured out and you're likely to crush it, and we'll just revisit it each quarter until we really have it right. But you have to sort of start somewhere, and you've got to give that sales leader latitude to kind of, turn some of those dials and help scale up the team. It's really helpful if you get someone who's kind of hasn't seen too much of the movie, so they're like a little bit hungry to prove themselves as a leader. I think that formula worked particularly well for us.
I'd love to get into sales compensation, but I'm going to table that because it dovetails really well into the next question, which is what do we do about leveling? Very often we see CEOs and founders saying, I'm going to hire the VP of sales, and the value proposition is they get to build out their team, and that's one selling point. There's also the question of, do we need a sophisticated seller who can hit the ground running and build pipeline and close revenue and maybe promote them into sales leadership as we grow? I'm very curious to hear, I'm sure there's not one right way, but I know founders really grapple with, do I get a hungry doer? Do I get a leader? The player coach model is so hard. I hear it all the time. Like, well, we need somebody senior who also is going to be selling. What do we do about that?
Hi, hungry doer here. I think what's most important is really just self-awareness on where you're at as a company and what you're looking for, and communicating that to the person that you're hiring, because nobody wants to be brought into a situation where they expect that they're going to have to build pipeline and then all of a sudden they don't, or vice versa actually is the worst situation. I'm someone that, as I was interviewing, I was identifying as someone who was a doer, but has a lot of aspirations to be a lot more than that. And I wanted to be in a position where I had leeway to grow, but right now my job was clear and comfortable and I felt like I could crush it. So I think that in our organization, we didn't hire a VP of sales first. I was the first person after founder-led sales, and now the org has kind of grown around me in both directions. So it's definitely one strategy, and there's many others that I'm sure we'll speak to, but I think just being self-aware about where your company is at, what that swim lane is going to be for that person, and making sure that they're good with that is the most important thing.
Hannah, I'm going to jump in. How is it for you when you're the doer, and then I don't know if you've lived through this, and then a leader comes in and now you're playing by their rules, or you know the product better than they do. How challenging is that? And what are some ways that what advice would you give to make that transition successful when you have an active sales team and then you bring in leadership?
Yeah, in a startup, everyone has multiple roles and there's always something to do. So I think just sort of respecting where everyone's expertise might lie in their experience, whether it's in the org or out of the org, in different experiences, I think everyone can sort of add value, and there's enough work to go around that it never has really been a situation where I need to offload things. There's always something else for me to do and different ways that I can lead, even in an org that has a little bit more structure. I think just making sure that that person knows what they're coming into in terms of where they need to enable, where they need to lead, where they need to potentially follow is definitely important. But I think just everyone, kind of understanding the chaos of a startup and working with that is something that I've learned is just absolutely necessary in whoever you hire.
I'm going to go back to my previous question. Does anyone else want to jump in on the leveling? I think it's such a tough question to answer and such a determination. I would just love to hear any expertise on.
I like that you said player coach, because I was going to bring that up, because when I mentioned, the unicorns out there, yes, it's hard to find somebody both able to and also willing to do that role, but I think in many cases it's the right fit for this stage where the founder is looking at handing off, because you really don't necessarily need a team, and you might have some repeatability. So we need to bring in a salesperson. The thing is, the willingness is oftentimes because it's hard to sort of guarantee them you're going to, you can position it as if you're successful, then you can hire people under you, but you can't really guarantee them of that. So, because it's still a little bit too early. So, but if you can find, and I've had some luck with people, and I've also had some bad luck with people like that, but if you find a person like that, that's usually the right fit. Another way to put it would be willingness to get their hands dirty, willingness to go on the calls, willingness to, work with the founder to figure out the repeatability part and then build a team. So, but very typically, those are two different skill sets, and finding them in the same person can be certainly a challenge. That's where you need a good recruiter. So.
Do we know anyone?
Yeah.
Chris, do you, in that consideration, would you, again, we're talking very generally, so we know every circumstance is going to be unique, but would you advise, when we're hiring a player coach, if you have somebody who's managed a team of 10, but they say, well, I'm willing to give that up as long as I can get back to it, is that more comfortable because they have the management experience? Or do we take somebody who has a proven track record of selling and does not have the management with the promise or the potential promise that they can grow into management?
I would say if they've never managed, then you're taking a big risk. Particularly, unless they're willing to take your first salesperson role without a guarantee they're going to run the team.
Then we redefine
Because
the
the
role.
management is just, if they've never shown they've done it, then you don't know that skill set. There are people who are willing to, who have a lot of experience, who like working with early stage companies, who kind of know that, yeah, I'll go in and do it for a while, and then I'll figure out who I have to hire to scale it. So, and if you can find somebody like that, that's the ideal hire. So, and again, they exist, but they're hard to find.
Thank
This,
you. Yeah.
this might be a little controversial. It's just sort of my own bias with my generalist background, but I have advised companies against hiring someone who's like deeply expert in one area as a sales leader because, history has shown through pretty much every startup that whether it's like you got to pivot or you're now adding new lines of business, I worry that there's this sort of like, oh, we found this market and we think it's promising, so we're going to go find someone who like is absolutely expert in that space to run this team for us. So, my advice is like, that's awesome. Find that person as an advisor or bring them onto your board or find other ways to tap into that expertise. One startup I know has sort of created a bounty program where they've used people from industry to be a referral engine for them to bring in leads, and then their sales team has closed it. So kind of keeps your optionality open. Again, sort of, I know I'm sort of putting my pet rock on the table because that's my background, but I would just worry about hyper specialization in your sales team early on, unless you have like a really, really niche startup, and that's just the obvious way to grow it.
I've seen that happen many times, and I think, and sometimes I wonder, because I'm a little bit on the outside, whether the founder just wants the relief of somebody else that knows exactly what the market needs or understands what the dynamics, and what many times happens is that person maybe isn't quite as entrepreneurial or doesn't have as broad a background. So they wind up getting more rigid than flexible in an earlier stage company that's trying to understand what the market wants and how to tell the story in the right way. That's an excellent, I think that's a great point.
Let's pretend we've decided to move forward. We're going to hire sales leadership. And again, I appreciate that all four of you are coming from some different perspectives, so bring in those viewpoints. We start the process. How do we determine what good looks like?
It's a great question.
I don't think I sent this question to them before this panel.
I think that understanding where your company is important. If your founding team is all in their 20s, good may look like someone who has seen that movie before a few times, because that's going to bring diversity of thought into your team. So, you don't make a ton of senior hires as a startup. So I would really think very critically about not only sort of their capability. Let's assume that they are a capable sales leader. I would look beyond that to say, like, how are they accretive to the team? How do they broaden the aperture of insight or dialogue or reach that we might not have within the founding group that's there. I'm also a huge believer in background checks. For one of my sales, I would say, background, not like formal police record stuff, although there's room for that, but usually I didn't have enough money to do that. It was more like, the back channel references, people who worked at the same company as this person, people in your network who might know them. I called someone up and he's like, that person will be your best sales hire for 3 months. I was like, oh, okay, super interesting information. I will file that away. And, you all have access to people who know people, and don't out someone who's like stealth interviewing. That is not cool. But when you're at the point where you are seriously interviewing something, do your homework. They're going to do homework on you. So make sure you're getting a bunch of different inputs beyond the references that they're giving you.
Any other contributions as to how do we determine what good looks like?
Well, I would just say, and if I put my former CEO hat on, the the more the conversations about kind of eyes on the prize, the better off you're going to be. You know, I mean, the head of sales has one job, basically, hit the number. And I'm talking from a funded startup. That might be a little different sometimes in a bootstrap situation, but when there's investors, there's a plan. You know, what's the plan? Hit the plan. The more the conversations about that, how we're going to hit the plan, the better off you are. The more it's about other things, you know, how many people am I get to hire? What's my title? Things like that. Those are, look, they're all necessary conversations, but I would say the more weighting it is on what are we, you know, what's the number? How are we going to get it? By the way, that's the founder's job too. So the more you're talking about that, the better you are. The more you're talking about all the other stuff, title, org size, and all that, that's all extraneous. I would also say too, it's kind of a byproduct, and some people may not like this, but there's a lot of tendency, and sometimes even investors will put pressure on to like go get a big name or somebody from like a big company, and that oftentimes is not, you know, it might look good in the press release, but it's oftentimes not aligned well with this stage of business. So you have to be careful about that. So avoid the temptation to go for somebody because they've got a really impressive LinkedIn and they were at Salesforce or they were at Google, they're at HubSpot, you know, all great companies, but they may not be the right fit for your role at this point in time because of the stage the company's at. And that oftentimes derails things too, when you kind of go for that big title and that big name, as opposed to somebody who just wants to talk about like, how are we going to get to the number? What do we got to do to get there?
Yeah, I think one of the most important skills, regardless of level, is just like the ability to iterate quickly and react quickly and pivot quickly if something isn't working, especially when you're setting up for scaling the org and bringing future people in. It can't just be work ethic that gets things done. It has to be some sort of strategy that is documented and understood, that you can pass on to somebody else as you're continuing to grow the org. So it can't just be like, you know, somebody that has brought in their playbook and it's worked at one place before and then they're going to bring that in here, because what if it doesn't work and they have to find something new? So you have to hire for the ability to like be able to pivot and understand that there's a multitude of paths and it has to be something that can work for other people, not just that one person.
Thank you for bringing up the playbook. That's like a real red flag to me when someone's like, I have my playbook and the team of people, and I'm like, ooh, wow,
And
very
I'm bringing
rigid.
it here to you. Yeah.
We know that, yes, hiring is what I do for a living, so I'm a little bit focused on it, but that's what we're talking about here. We know that it's a two-way street in hiring, and right now we're talking a lot about how do we go out and get good and what does good look like, but it is a two-way street. Most of us who are founders here, so sorry to say this, but it's not Google, it's not HubSpot, but Google and HubSpot started somewhere, so it's a sales process. How do we make our tiny companies or our no-name companies, how do we make them marketable, attractive, appealing? How do we give a great candidate experience? How do we build employer brand? Do you have any talking points as to what should founders be doing when they're going out to get their first big hire? How are they selling their company?
I'm a fan of referrals because
Yeah,
if
I
you're
would second that, yeah.
if your head of sales candidates come from your board's already, they have an interest in selling your company to potential candidates. So that, you know, that's a good way to help get over some of the agita. You know, if this person's leaving a job, my experience has been, you know, senior salespeople expect a certain amount of compensation. Like they're not going to take an all equity deal. Sorry. So you've got to make sure that, you know, your business plan can support that salary. You know, make them part of the process as well. A lot of them came in maybe later to a company. HubSpot will take as a for instance, so they missed out on the early equity. So you could sort of like dangle that opportunity to kind of get that early equity upside that they might have seen other people get at another company. But yeah, referrals have been sort of the strongest source of candidates for me.
Jen, do you have you worked with founders to help them develop their story for the purpose of building their teams?
Yes. I would say probably later stage. We've worked with a lot of organizations that are trying to recruit talent. Excuse me. The one thing just to add to the referral piece, and again, it's probably a loaded topic, but I think that the referrals are really important, but it's really important for us as founders to have an open mind in terms of diversity and how we can make sure that we're not all hiring the same people and we're looking outside of our normal referral pools and asking questions about where talent might be found that's not in our own network of people that we know. Because I think sometimes, speaking of Boston, I think Boston can be a little insular that way. And I think it's important for us to think about our referral networks as amplifiers of our existing networks, as opposed to always a place that we're going to find people that maybe we've worked with before or that are within our existing networks. So I just wanted to add to that. In terms of building talent brands, I think talent brands are most valuable when an organization is of a certain scale. You know, when you're still growing and building, and it's the talent brand is the culture of the company, and that really has a lot to do with the people that are there. So we don't usually get brought in specifically to build a talent brand for a younger company. We usually get brought in to come up with a story that can work for recruitment and for sales, so that there's some framework that you're telling, some story that you're telling out in the marketplace that works as you're trying to grow by bringing employees in and as you're trying to grow by bringing new clients in. So having that combined framework for how to talk about your organization and attract lots of different stakeholders to the group is probably more of a brand exercise or a messaging exercise than an employment branding thing at a certain size.
Jen, do you agree that that branding could start at any stage, though? Perhaps they wouldn't be bringing in your company at a pre-Series A size to do it, but can that branding start at any time?
Yeah, I mean, I think brands it doesn't take a branding agency. You start a company, you're starting to build a brand, right? You're starting to build a relationship between people. You don't have to hire an agency to start to do that. I think when it gets tricky is when what I see happen often with founders when it comes to the brand side is that they're benchmarking themselves off of competitors, or they've zeroed in on one aspect of their company that's truly differentiated, and they start talking about that over and over again. And either they're so zeroed in on the one thing that's different that they kind of start to go down this rabbit hole of that story, or they go in the complete opposite direction, which is always interesting, and in the world of AI is easy to highlight, which is they start saying exactly the same things as everyone else, and they just think that they're saying it in a different way. So I think one of the things that's really interesting for earlier stage companies is to try to take a step back and think about what is the value that you're bringing to the market, who's the customer, and how can you tell that story in a really, really different way. I find, I will say, I'm not always in tech, we sort of work across a lot of different industries, that some industries tend to use the same vocabulary over and over and over again. And if you can find a way as a founder or salesperson to tell similar stories but use different language, it's really empowering for everybody that works there and also for the sales team.
Are there any final tidbits, best-in-class pieces of advice that you would give to our audience here as you are scaling, as you are passing on sales to new leadership? Can anyone add like the headline of the best piece of advice they have in their back pocket?
Stay close to the customer.
I love that. Hannah, anything from a leadership perspective that might come to mind?
It was kind of in the concept of the last question, just about like when you're bringing on someone new and you have a small group already, understanding like what you're looking for in that person, and as you're interviewing that person, making sure that the interview experience, the candidate experience makes sense for them versus having them meet with every single person at the company. I think that's pretty easy to do because when you're a small group, you're like, hey, all of our voices matter and all of us have a vested interest in bringing this person on from where their department sits and from what they care about and from what this gap is. I think just understanding like, you know, there's a lot of different components of that candidate experience that could be perceived negatively by having a candidate meet with 15 people and go through all of those different rounds. I think it's really important as a brand and as a company to figure out what that experience is and what you want to portray to that person while still vetting them for the fit that they have within your company. So that would be kind of my last point of advice on the hiring topic.
That's amazing. We're going to wrap up our panel and open up to questions. Just one last, is there anything else burning on your minds that you want to share with the audience before we open up for questions?
I was also just going to say transparency, I think, is very important as well, you know, because there are times when, you know, is the head of sales we're bringing in, do they really have to like see all the details of the plan? And no, they don't necessarily need to see all the details. They don't need to know everybody's salary or equity stakes, but they do need to know at the top line, like what the number is, what the expected number of sales hires is. And, you know, it's such a critical role that you're going to have to err generally on the side of being more transparent versus less transparent with this hire, because it's absolutely critical. Because like I said, it's one job, and it's in many respects the most important job that's going to determine your ability to get to the next level. So having that level of trust too, that you can have that level of transparency, is really, really important.
Have you seen the opposite? I imagine yes.
I have.
Because
I'm not going to name names.
no.
I've lived it, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I would say run the same process for all of your candidates. You'd be surprised at how many companies have different slates of interviewers for candidates, different questions. It's really hard when you get to debrief and try to compare folks if they had completely different interviewers and different questions and nothing was consistent. So sorry, that's the ops person in me saying like process, please. It's better for the candidates, it's better for the team when you're coming down to make the decision as well.
All right. Amazing. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Oh my God, I have so much power in these fingers. What can we answer for you all?
Here's a mic.
Got a
So
mic.
we have online.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was wondering about very early stage companies that are bootstrapped, and how would you advise like salary versus commission versus equity if you're not funded yet for that kind of situation?
I would do an eat what you kill.
Sorry?
Eat what you kill. Basically, like they get a piece of the deals that they bring in, so that you're not paying them on revenue that's not coming into the company. Or another thing I've done is try and set it up as an advisory to start. Again, it depends on what you need, but you can do a bit of a like try before you buy, where you can bring someone in as an advisor, sort of see if the chemistry's there, see if they really can bring the dazzling Rolodex that they claim to have to the table to help the company before you part with your hard-earned equity and cash.
Yeah.
Okay. Eat what you kill, meaning like high commission or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I agree with that completely. And you can be pretty generous on the commission side in that case, and you should be, because you're not really in a position that you could be, but you don't really want to give up equity. But yeah, you can, if you bring in this amount of business, just make sure you do it on a cash basis. Like in the software space, it's often like, I signed this agreement, I should get this much of the agreement. But if the agreement pays out over 3 years, sales careers tend to be short. You want to make sure you don't, overpay up front. So kind of align it with your cash flow. But yeah, I would say if you can, do some kind of revenue share, eat what you kill, and you can be fairly generous, that's generally the best way to do it.
Any recommendations on what percentage for like a high percentage?
Well, let me put it this way. I'd say it should be in the double digits, probably. Typically when you think about sales commissions, they're more like 6%, 8%, 3%, right? But like in that case, you're definitely in the double digits. You might even be in the mid double digits, depending on the situation. It's situation dependent, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for all your contributions today. It's awesome to get the feedback. Question on the recruiting process. When do you include board members, or do you include board members, given that this role can be highly visible on hitting the plan and hitting the number? Do you want their feedback? Do you want them part of the process itself?
I think including the right board member is an important part of the candidate experience. When I was interviewing and looking at positions, it was important to me to understand who was actually kind of behind the scenes and who was directly involved day to day, as well as understand the actual success of the company and whether the board member kind of echoed the other things that I heard from leadership. I would say a one-on-one situation would probably be smart, not like multiple members of the board, and picking someone that makes sense to kind of fill that puzzle of what you're actually looking for from all of the interviewers is important. Like, for example, we don't have a full head of HR, but we have a head of finance who kind of fills some HR roles, and we had a person on our board who is in the HR advisory kind of space filling my interview on the board and also kind of filling the HR side. So I thought that was helpful.
Yep.
Hi. As a small bootstrapped company that's gotten up to about $500,000 ARR, I'm looking for someone who can be can manage the customer experience, can look for new markets. Assuming I'm not barking up the wrong tree, what does this panel think that person is called? What
Like
am
a
I
title,
looking
you
for?
mean?
Called as in title.
Maybe it's a title. What sort of experience am I looking for? What sort of title do I offer that person?
I'm going to say that's a really specific question based upon a lot of detail we would need to get from you to give you an educated answer. And we all would be happy to talk offline about it. The typical, I shouldn't answer this, but we typically see VPs of sales, heads of sales, but it really depends. Do we think that's too tight of a question to give a general answer to?
So it'd be okay to hire a VP of sales, say, before there is ever a salesperson?
I think it really,
I've
I
seen
think it
like
depends.
client experience, like something that's sort of a hybrid between you're trying to understand what the market's doing and you're also trying to say you're trying to find some new opportunities. So I think sometimes there's opportunities to be really creative with that. So it maybe doesn't have to be sales or
Yeah, I guess kind of the question that I would have is, should that be part of the CEO responsibility to really think about new markets at this sort of early bootstrappy stage versus someone that you're bringing
Yeah.
in as a salesperson? I would think that you may want to take that sort of
Yeah.
business and market evaluation and keep that in the CEO remit, and then focus your salesperson more on growing revenue and growing the more known part of the business, unless you're really bringing someone in as a, kind of a co-founder. It still sounds like it's pretty product market fit in some areas. So unless it's just like we have exactly the thing and we just need to bring it across different markets, but there's nothing changing in the product, I would hesitate to try and bring someone in to do that work.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Hopefully that's interesting to somebody other than me.
Yeah, there's somebody.
Hi, I'm Marcus Bird. I run a brand consultancy, and I have a question, I think for Jennifer, but probably for the whole board. I have a particular client, who we won't name names, who really is against some standardization measures, like doesn't like some of the previous decks that he's had in the past. I really appreciated your point about potentially making different ones that tell different stories.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious from a non-just ROI standpoint, what are the biggest benefits to repeatability as you're trying to educate your client and help them scale?
Well, I mean, I often talk about that the most expensive thing that you can do in marketing is be wildly inconsistent, right? Because you're just throwing money at a whole bunch of different stories. And so there's a cost benefit to consistency. I think also in certain types of environments, younger companies that are changing really quickly are going through a lot of inflection points. It's really reassuring for customers and for employees to be hearing the same messages over and over again, because then they know that there's leadership is saying we're heading in this direction and this is where we're going. I will say I think I've always laughed a little bit about the run to the deck, right? Everybody wants a deck. They want the pitch deck or the the killer infographic. If I tell you how many times somebody's told me that, it's like they want the perfect thing. And I actually often advise, and I'm sure you do this if you're coming at it through the lens of brand, that it's almost more important that you have the framework for the story before you get to the deck. Because what happens is you start to tell this linear story through a deck or a pitch book, and people get caught. I don't know your client, you know, where your client's coming from, but they sort of get caught saying, well, I don't like the way that that sounds, or we like to say it a different way, or that's an old graphic. We've totally, you know, evolved from that. But if you can take them back to the framework behind the deck, there's often a lot more conversation that you can have, and then it allows you as the brand consultant to figure out how to translate that in a way that works for the founder or the salespeople who are there at that time, and they don't get so caught up on what's on the slide, which I think can be real. That's a tough trap to get into.
Thank you very much. I'm curious about like AI tools in the sales space. So it does appear, you know, like there's tons of AI tools for everything. I would say maybe the sales development representative role today is kind of getting encroached on in ways by AI tools. And I'm curious about your perspective of it's like, oh yeah, like lean into these tools or be cautious about them, or yeah, that's my general question.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. I think that they should be, yes, you should look at them, but look at them as tools, not a replacement. I guess that's a very high level short answer. You know, the customers, the prospects can generally tell when they're receiving AI-based outreach, and you know, I'm quite skeptical of AI SDRs. Which has become kind of a big thing out in Silicon Valley, at least. There's a lot of talk about replacing people. I don't think it's replacing people. I think the best salespeople are going to figure out ways to use AI to help them do their jobs better, as opposed to be replaced by it. So, and there's also just so many point solution tools out there right now. It's completely overwhelming. I do think things will settle down, but I think the potential's there, but it's going to be assisting people, not replacing people.
I agree, and I think when it comes to bringing on tools, you should consider kind of like doing it at a department level. Like, don't bring on sales tools in the AI space before you have someone that comes in and brings in their own tooling. There's a lot of things to choose from right now, and making sure that you're architecting an org that makes sense with the right tools. I think you should, you know, potentially consider leaving it to the person that you're bringing on to lead that department. But I agree completely with you, Chris. Like, there's definitely a lot of things that can assist and augment and amplify a single salesperson to do more work, and organize their work and be more efficient. But it can also become a little bit of AI chaos if you bring in too much.
Just to add to that, so if I put my founder hat on, I think for certain types of businesses, like for me as a service-based business, brand consultancy business, there are some really great tools that small organizations like mine have never had access to, which I think are super exciting because they let us have insight into the triggers that make somebody, you know, start thinking about certain things like brand or messaging and some of those things. So I have to say we've been experimental with a couple of different platforms, but we just landed on one several months ago that I have to say has been a little transformative. So to the point of experimenting, like I think it's worth trying because if it works for your organization, it's kind of a game changer. Mm-hmm. Apollo. And I mean, we tried a few things, but that has been a game changer for I mean, we're a small organization and we're selling in a service environment. We're not selling technology. So understanding when certain things are changing in an organization and when to raise your hand is half the game for, again, not my clients, but for us as a business. And that's been a big shift for us. Say it again. Yeah, Apollo has this great platform for triggers, right? And I know that larger platforms have had, but small businesses like mine just didn't have access to them. So that's been really helpful for us. And to your point, if you're doing more one-on-one outreach and you're just trying to, it's been that we've found it very successful because it's not going through like waterfall emails that don't sound like you. It's like you get the chance. Excuse me, I have a cold today. You have a chance to actually do some of the outreach one-on-one. Again, if you're a smaller organization, doesn't necessarily scale the way that maybe other teams need to.
We had a question here.
Thank you. So this question is about recruiting. You mentioned that, of course, recruiting through your network and referrals is the best way to find someone. Is there ever been a situation where you posted the job publicly, or can you think of any condition where you might want to do that instead of just keeping it as a quiet, closed search?
So I'm a fan of posting open roles. Because you don't want to disqualify good candidates just because you're doing tapping your own network. The challenge with posting is you're going to get a lot of inbound. And back to what Hannah was saying about the candidate experience, like just don't be that company that ghosts people. Even if it's just a quick automated thanks, but we're not moving your candidacy forward. Just if you do open postings, the folks who interview or apply the courtesy of a quick no if you're not going to move them forward. I'm also really not a fan of just perpetually open postings. Some companies just feel like they need to post stuff out there and put it out, even if they're not really sure they're going to hire that role. Again, it's just not something that I think is useful because you get inbound and you've got to handle it some way. But I do think having an open role, even if you only post it for a couple days because you already maybe have some candidates in mind, you still don't know. You might net someone great through an open posting. So I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I also think the post itself is a sign of legitimacy. Even if you come in through a referral, to see what is expected from whoever is coming into that role and seeing the actual job description, I think is helpful.
I'll add my quick 2 cents that a post is a tool in the toolbox. It can yield results. It can demonstrate what the market looks like. There's going to be a lot of inaccuracy. I would not post thinking that is how you are going to get a critical hire, but it doesn't necessarily hurt to put it up there. Any other questions that we can get to?
I guess I'll ask one. Especially, I know a lot of people here are super early, right? And I think it's funny because a lot of the time we talk about, having to wear multiple hats. I think, Liz, you talked about what it looks like when you start to know that you probably need to hire. So you start looking into hiring when that bandwidth is starting to get full. What does it look like if us as founders, we get kind of headstrong and we're like, no, we're going to do it ourselves anyways, and we just keep going? What does it look like? What are the pitfalls that people fall into when they kind of have that mentality that they're just going to keep on, going at it?
Yeah, your board, if you have a board of directors, they'll probably start to be not so subtle about suggesting that. That would certainly be one sign, is that you're getting, the advisors and board coming at you saying, hey, really is time to find a head of sales. I think Chris made the point earlier. CEOs have a lot of responsibilities, and you have to really think about where's your time best spent. Like, what are you uniquely able to do that nobody else can do? And even if it's, this is coaching I got early in my career. My executive coach was like, Liz, tell me all the things that you like to do. And so I was rattling off the stuff that I love to do. And she looked at me and she's like, do you think anybody on your team would like to be doing that too? And I was like, oh, wow, did not see that one coming. So, a moment of reflection, it's like, am I holding on to this because I am the best person to do this? Or am I holding on to this because I really like it, or it feels familiar in terms of all the scary stuff that I need to be doing as a early stage CEO? And at least sales is one of those places where you can see progress, and there's so much in an early stage company where it's is this working? I don't know, maybe. Just maybe ask yourself the question, is there somebody else who could be doing that as well or better?
Yeah, I will also say Unusual Ventures has a pretty good blog on kind of founder-led sales. There's a lot of others out there, but I know that's one that I've always found valuable. And, you know, scaling at the right time, premature scaling, when to hire, they have some good stuff out there that you might look at too. A lot of the VCs do, but I know that I've kind of used their posts in the past. Lars Albright, who I think is their partner here in Boston, he writes on this topic pretty often. So, yep. Investor expectations around what you just described.
Okay, last chance, guys. This is it. Yes.
Last question, thanks.
Thank you. So one of the things I'm just thinking about is when you're the founder, you know everything. Like you know as much about the product and the market as you possibly could. And I've got to think that when you're the founder and you hand the reins over to somebody that's the head of sales, they're probably it's almost guaranteed that they're going to flail at first. You're going to want to get them above that hump. And I'm just kind of curious about, number one, how you've avoided that, and like what your advice would be to a founder. Because I've just seen this in different places where the founder just feels like, you know what, like I'm the guy, like I'm the best person to sell. And that's just it's not scalable. And in a lot of ways, this is what delegation is about. So I'm just kind of curious how you guys would react to that.
Yeah, I'm being a little repetitive, but that's where the trust, transparency, and you have to sort of have, because you're essentially going to be almost married to this person. I can say that because I know your wife too, but anyway. But yeah, no, it's going to be a very close relationship because yeah, you know the most, you're going to be the best salesperson, but you've got other responsibilities, particularly when you take funding, and you can't necessarily keep doing that because it's blocking you from doing a lot of the other things that the company needs to grow. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of core here, but it's got to be a very close, very trusting, and very transparent relationship.
Yeah, I had our founder on every single one of my sales calls for almost 3 months. And that was at one point not by my choice. That was him hanging on, and that's okay. But I think that, moving your founder into a player coach and understanding like they also have to train the next people that come beyond them, and understanding that that's success for the business is really important. I feel like at this point, like I know a very similar amount to our founder in terms of what I need to know for my sales role. Obviously, there's many other things in terms of history and how different departments have worked together over time that are kept in his brain, and that's okay. But I think making sure that onboarding and that training is clear and everyone's prepared for it sets your new person up for success.
All right, could we just give a round of applause to our panelists? I think we can do a little bit better than that. We are honestly just so honored to have all of you guys come and impart your wisdom. I know I learned a lot. Never even really thought about sales, I'm not gonna lie, but it's definitely something that's important no matter what stage you're on, and just being able to think about these things has been super valuable. Just a couple notes as we close up here. We do have a fair that's going on here at 6:30. We're going to be setting up for that fair here. So we're going to need everybody to kind of filter out relatively quickly. But it's going to be awesome here. Again, thank you for Suffolk for hosting all of this. And I don't think there are any other notes that I have. So thank you guys all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, good luck. Safe travels. So